Welcome along to the second installment of the Dylan Eli Masterclasses that's run by SAE. This session, we're going to be going through a whole lot more studio and Pro Tools stuff with Dylan. So just to start from the top, my name's Chris. I'm the ILC at the Melbourne SAE campus here. So I'm going to be emceeing this one today. We've also got Nick Harrison here, who's just jumped in. He's one of our audio lecturers, as well as Gareth Parton, who's our head of department of audio in Melbourne. And last but not least, we've got Dylan coming to us from his Porsche Street Studios in LA. Hey Dylan, how you doing? Hey.
Great.
There you go.
Doing well. Thanks, Chris. Your beard's looking great as always.
Yeah. The isolation Gandalf beard is in full form. It's not going anywhere.
I like it.
Excellent. So just really quickly, a little bit of housekeeping here, guys. For all those attending, we've got a Q&A section down the bottom here. So you'll notice that all the attendees are unable to speak. This is basically just to keep the session running in a nice formatted fashion. If you do have any questions, if you can pop them in the Q&A section down the bottom. We've got around about 100 attendees here, so we won't be able to get to everyone, but we'll do our best. We're going to be going through and sorting out all the questions and trying to get Dylan to answer as many as he can at the end of the session. However, if you do have any questions there that are super applicable to what's going on within the sesh, throw it up anyway, and we'll try and throw it in. We're also going to try and address some of the questions that came up during the first installment. Just there was quite a few people that were throwing up questions there, and we didn't have time to answer them all. So we'll jump in towards the end and do a full Q&A session with Dylan and try and get some answers for you there. So just to go through a little bit of the session format, some of the stuff we're going to be going over today. So as I said, we're going to jump into a whole lot more studio stuff. So this is going to involve delving deep into the Pro Tools sessions that Dylan's put up. You should all as attendees have received a link to download some session files, which I believe are all Pro Tools session files. So if you're running any other DAWs, that's probably not going to work for you. So jump in and have a look at those sessions. I'd recommend probably running those after the Zoom's over, just to not chock up too much space on your sound card. But take some notes. Dylan's going to show you through exactly what he's doing within the sessions, a few little mixing techniques and things there. And that'll basically allow you to open up exactly the same sessions and play along at home. So session overview, we're going to do a quick little tour of Dylan's studios in LA there. He's going to show us through some of the gear stuff. So all you gear geeks out there, stick around and have a look for that one. We're going to go through some signal flow stuff. So some particular console modifications that Dylan's got going on in the studio. We're going to talk about some post-production things. So for those of you that have read Dylan's bio, he's jumped into the post-production world a little bit as well. And then we're going to talk about some recording session and studio workflow tips and tricks. To finish off, we're going to go through some stuff like things you wish you'd have known earlier. I'm guessing there's a whole lot of audio engineers out there just starting out. So that's probably a really important one for you to tune into. And also things like artist relations. So how to go about working with the artists in the studio and how to get the best results out of them. And then finally, we'll finish off with a nice little Q&A session, so we'll be able to answer all your questions there. So without further ado, I'm going to chuck it over to Dylan, and yeah, man, take it away.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I had a lot of fun on the first one. I hope there's some people that are returning from the first one. So yeah, I guess we're gonna dig into, I guess a little bit of my workflow. Let's kind of, first off, we can talk a little bit about a Pro Tools session, which, like I have sort of a template that I work from. I don't adhere to it religiously, but there's a good starting point, and the first thing is kind of like labeling my buses and my sends and all that stuff, and I'll share my screen here and kind of show you my IO setup a little bit, and then you can we'll go through my template. So that's going to be the kind of beginning of any mix and or even recording stuff that I'm going to do. So we'll share this here. So this is one of the sessions that we put up for you guys. This is this artist, his name's Ari Welcome. Pretty cool stuff. It's, you know, kind of unique, like pop rock, you know, and there's some kind of smooth stuff, some, you know, heavier kind of guitars, distorted vocals. Like, it's kind of why I chose this. It kind of has a lot of different cool things going on. So anyway, so we'll go up here to setup, and I'll show you my IO, and you'll have an idea of, so I've set this up, you know, pre anything, and I've got, if you see down here, these are just my outputs of my system here, the physical outputs. But then as you go down here, you'll see, starting here, I've created and named all these buses here. You know, I've got a kick and a snare. These are mono, and then a toms, and you'll see that's a stereo. These are all buses internally in Pro Tools. And I've basically set this up so when I'm mixing, I kind of already know where I'm going to be starting, and typically what elements, you know, I'm kind of covering my bases on all the elements here. You know, obviously kicks and snares are pretty important, you know, and I want to be able to sort of address those two things separately. Toms, you know, obviously they're important, but they're kind of important to address on their own. We've got a cymbals bus, which I kind of use that for hi-hats, overheads. I'll even put like tambourines and sometimes percussion in there, or if there's any kind of, you know, high frequency kind of stuff that's drum-like, I'll sometimes throw that in there. And then I've got an all drum bus. So basically all of these buses that are drum related now go through another stereo bus here. I'll get into why I do all this here in a minute. I'll just kind of show you what I've got, and then I'll kind of explain why I have these different buses. We've got a drum verb bus. This is specifically for the drums, which usually that verb I like to have separately because it's kind of more to add some realism and some width and depth to the drums, not so much like a room sound in some cases. So that's why it's sort of a separate thing. So I could add room later, bigger room. Percussion bus, that's self-explanatory. Again, sometimes I use that separately from the drums. We've got bass, mono, stereo, guitar, which this is a send. I'll explain this in a little bit too. You know, another set of like stereo and mono guitars. Sometimes I get guitars why there's a stereo bus and a mono bus, which they're really the same. They're just labeled differently. I do that because sometimes I get mono guitars from an artist or a producer or whatever that's recorded, and I need to unmonoize them typically. So I just do that to kind of organize them in my head to know which ones are which. Then I've got a music bus. So basically everything we just talked about now would go through this music bus. Some of this stuff I don't use when I'm mixing on the actual analog console. Some of this stuff applies and would apply to if you're mixing in the box, which I do a lot of as well. Next, we've got vocals. I've got an all vocal bus. This is actually a little bit of an older template. I have like a separate lead vocal bus and a background vocal bus that would normally be going through there, but for some reason it's not on this IO setup. But again, I can kind of dig into that here in a minute. Now I've got some different verbs here. I've got a kind of a verb that I use just for the Vox, a short verb, which I use for like some widening and thickening. It's not so much a verb. It's a little bit more of a, just kind of to chunky things up a little bit. I'll show you, that's that's one of my go-tos that I use a lot, and I'll show you that. Delay, that's explanatory. Then I've got a master bus. So that's kind of like all the stuff we talked about now then feeds back into that master bus. So I can kind of put a master bus compressor, EQ, or something over everything. This tuning bus is if I'm doing some auto tune and I need to bus some tracks through the auto tune and actually commit it in to a separate track. So this is sort of a, not so much a mixing thing, more kind of like tracking and editing. And then I've got a mix print bus, which again, this is like, I'll send out of my master bus with all my master bus goodness. But this mixed print bus is if I'm sending through my desk or any analog hardware, I need a place to bring that back in, and that's my mixed print bus. So that's kind of a rundown of the, you know, sort of my basic IO setup there. And we'll go back into the session here and I'll show you, you know, kind of how this is set up. So you see this is actually a stereo kick track, which I'm sending out this kick and snare bus since it's a stereo. This is a little counterintuitive because this is a little bit of an older IO setup for some reason, but you get the idea. I'm sending the actual physical audio track to a bus, which then I've got an insert within the bus. So I'm doing, if I had maybe multiple kicks to blend sounds, I would blend those to the same bus and then treat them the same with the same EQ, you know, compression or whatever after I get a good relative blend of the two sounds together. And that's kind of the same for everything. And that's why I have the buses, so that if I have two like instruments, it depends. I'll address and sometimes I'll put inserts on the individual tracks themselves, but I tend to, you know, for a couple reasons. One is I tend to send things through the buses and then EQ, compress, put plugins or whatever I need to collectively. And there's a couple reasons why I do that. One is, you know, to me, it feels, it kind of glues those elements together, even though we're blending them, but they're kind of hitting the same EQ and the same compressor kind of the same. So that it just makes them a little bit more cohesive, in my opinion. So that's kind of why I do that. And you'll see here, this is a perfect example. I've got these, you know, all these snare tracks here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different snares, and those are all getting bused to this snare bus track here. And if you can see, I don't really have any EQs, compressors, any kind of anything on any of these individual tracks, but these are all going out and being treated by this one kind of amazing plugin, which is Isotope Alloy. I love this plugin for drums specifically. So it's got all this cool stuff. It's got equalizers, this transient kind of peak thing, an exciter, which gives you some fun harmonics and distortion and just kind of tone shaping there. And you've got a dynamic section here as well. These I kind of don't really have a magic setting per se. There's honestly, this plugin, what I really like about it is it's got some pretty amazing presets. So if you go here to global, and they've got these drums, and they've kind of got the individual and then kick drums and percussions and snares, or they've got this, you know, which obviously this one's on snares, and you can see I've kind of picked one of their presets. I've tweaked it a little bit, but I kind of found this one that I really liked and then kind of tweaked little things here and there with it. this plugin, the reason why I use it is it's real aggressive. And with these drums, with this mix, I wanted to have this really kind of like dry but aggressive uh, drum sound. And these are all programmed drums, which we'll play these here in a second. I've got to play from my stems here, which this is the whole drum bus together, but you'll kind of hear this is the, all the drums together, which there's no real overheads. None of these are real drums. They're all programmed drums. So hope you guys can hear that. And we were kind of messing around with some sound stuff earlier, so I'm not sure if you guys heard that. Were you able to hear that, Chris? Thumbs up.
Yeah, you're all good there, mate.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so okay, so that is, again, that's a good example of, and I can solo these elements, which this is where I don't think you're going to be able to hear this. You can't hear that, I don't think. Well, we don't need to dig into this right now. I'll kind of get through this session, and then maybe we can dig into some of the elements. I'll just kind of keep going through my template here. So same thing. Snares are all going through this one bus. Then, same thing with my hi-hat type audio stuff. This one's like hi-hats and some tambourines here, if you see this, another tambourine. And those are going through this hats bus. You see, I don't have any plugins going on here. This is a trick that no one will ever tell you. If it doesn't need to be processed, don't process it. I'm a fan of, if the thing sounds good already, I don't need to do anything to it. A lot of people think that you got to put some compression and some EQ on things because because it makes it sound better, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's better to just let it be. And I spend the time getting the relationship and the blend of the things together, and to making them work together. So anyway, hats bus, and then now we've got this session, I'm not using my all drum bus because I actually used my analog desk to split the stems out and then EQ and kind of do the final leveling. So I've sort of submixed in the box here, and then split that out to my console. So, let's see if we can, I'll go to the console here in a minute. We'll just keep going down the line here. So same thing with the buses, or the bass rather. Anything bass is kind of going through its bass bus. This one, I don't have anything on the master bus. This is where I've got a couple individual plugins on the actual single elements themselves. So again, there's no rules. It just kind of, I use my ears and listen and see what the track needs. Let's see, we've got, a bunch of guitars here. So if you see this one, there's a lot of guitar tracks. There's not a lot of parts, but there's a lot of stacks that this producer sent. So, same thing, going through my guitar bus here with a singular plugin here. I've got this Chef's Channel, which is pretty cool. On there, we've got let's see, the keyboard stuff. Again, this is there's a lot going on in this track. There's this arpeggiated thing. There's this kind of side chain thing. There's a lot of little stabs and stuff. This producer likes to kind of, he's got some interesting sounds and uses them in a different way. I've done a lot with him. His name is, what is his name? Casey. His stuff's pretty cool. So that's pretty straightforward. Everything's kind of going through my synth bus. You know, I've got some sends going on here, which this is sending to my vocal verb. So we're into the vocals here. So my vocals, same thing. We're gonna, you know, kind of start sending vocals through to my all lead vocal bus here. And so I've got, you see, I've got, you know, quite a few things on my chain here. I'll talk about this first one. This is kind of a go-to for me. I love this original Fairchild 660, which is their mono one. They have a stereo, it can accept stereo, but it doesn't have the two separate time constants. This is like the one that comes with Pro Tools. Out of all the other Fairchilds, in my opinion, this is the one that sounds the best. Like, I put this thing on vocals all the time. It just does something really cool. And I don't really compress much. Let's see if we can see kind of how much this is actually compressing. So this one's actually compressing quite a bit. I'm compressing about 3 dB with this Fairchild, which I guess that's not super uncommon for me. But if you look at these settings, this time constant at 1, it's pretty much, that's where I usually always live. I go make that guy time constant 1, and then I sort of drive the input to taste on him. The next in my chain, that, you know, I use this kind of first in my vocal chain to just kind of gather it together. I'm not compressing, and that's what's cool about this compressor. I mean, it's compressing, but it's not a noticeable like control. It's just kind of, it lets it breathe and kind of gives the vocal some vibe and character, and kind of compresses a little bit. And I usually compress in multiple places. I don't usually like have one compressor that's locking down on something. That's another sort of trick that I like to use, is I compress, especially if I'm recording the project, if I'm recording the vocals, if I'm recording if I'm recording anything and it needs compression, I don't usually compress it super hard right away. I'll give it a little bit during the recording, especially if I know I'm going to be mixing it. And then that's kind of like one layer of compression. I kind of try to think of it like that, as sort of a couple layers of compression. Again, I don't do any of this stuff like arbitrarily. If it doesn't need compression, I won't put compression on it. You know, but if I know it's going to need compression, again, this is sort of like one of my go-tos with vocals specifically, is this compressor with these settings first in the chain, and where it falls in the chain is important too. So this is kind of helping, kind of taming it out a little bit. And then my next plugin in the chain is this BX console, which again, this plugin alliance stuff is amazing. If anyone out there, you know, is a plugin head and hasn't found out about the plugin alliance stuff, I highly recommend it. It's really affordable for the amount of things you get, first off. Second off, all the things sound really, really good. They've got this kind of like virtual gain thing that they have that gives some drive to the channels, which is really cool, that I like. So check out the plugin alliance stuff, specifically the channels like the BX console, the BXS console, which is like a SSL channel. This is like a Neve VR emulation. But yeah, so this is really cool because this has got a compressor in it as well. Let's see, this is not fitting on my screen totally here. Here we go, this is a little better. So if you see, this is your compressor section here, if you will. So this is in, and again, we'll hit play here and we'll see this is your limiting, your actual gain reduction here, this meter. So if you saw on my, we'll put both of these up here. So you can see I've got a little bit of kind of compression happening on both compressors here. So that's a trick that I like to use, is not getting all my compression from one place, kind of layering it. And this Fairchild's really cool. It's got a vibe, it's character. It's kind of a slower compressor, but it's just kind of, giving me a little bit of the reining things in a little bit. And then we've got the Neve channel here, which this guy's, a more of a modern kind of compressor. He can be faster. If you see, I'm doing about, 2.5 to 1 compression ratio, which isn't all that much. Like you see, there's down here, it's relative. It's like, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 dB of compression, but it's not at a very high ratio. It's at a lower ratio. So it's kind of, again, it's like I've got a layer of the Fairchild compression going. I've got a layer of the Neve compression going, which is, now adding up to, more than just a little bit. So yeah, so that's kind of, my rant on compression. If you see this EQ here again, as every vocalist and every element and every instrument's a little bit different, but I would say, this is not an uncommon range to kind of take a little bit out. If you see here, I'm taking 3.5 dB out at 300 hertz about. Anywhere between like 160 and 300 hertz in most things kind of just gets in the way and gets muddy and messy. So I would, start off with, if your mix just really sounds like, and you just can't seem to quite get it to feel like everything kind of has its place, start by kind of finding that real muddy, low, mid stuff in a lot of the elements. If you solo it and kind of listen to what's really going on, you'll clear things up a lot by sucking some of that kind of range of frequencies out. Again, use your ears and figure out what works best for each element. But again, I'll go through show you some other EQs too that are unrelated to vocals, and you'll see probably something in this range is being cut, a little bit or a lot. So yeah, so that's that. Next thing in my chain, and then I've got a Decapitator, which this is, not a trick that I came up with. This is something that a lot of people use, I think, which just is like the Decapitator is a plugin that is, I don't really totally know what it's doing other than just adding distortion. It's a distortion box, but it's like really kind of has this nice sort of high mid thing that it does, and it just like helps vocals cut through and kind of sit on top of the mix pretty nice. I don't use this a lot because I have a lot of analog stuff, and the analog stuff, I like to drive it a little bit harder sometimes and give me some of what this thing's giving me. But in essence, this is really like, I'm just using this as like an EQ in a way to kind of give like, so if you see here, I'm boosting, 4K by, 6 dB, which is kind of a lot actually for 4K. But obviously the vocal, needed that. I'm also boosting a lot, 10 dB here at 12K, which is this kind of airiness. Again, that vocal seemed to need it, and the Decapitator is probably just it's adding a little bit to both of those things, presence wise, kind of harmonically. It just kind of makes it cut through and sound a little bit more edgy, if you will.
Hey, Dylan,
So
on that note,
yeah,
could you unmute your audio channel there and just give us a quick listen to that Decapitator?
yeah. So all right, let's solo these vocals.
The only way that I'll ever make it home. One drug for my spirit craving.
So this is with it.
One drug to forget my
And that's without
pain. One drug that'll keep the ghosts from driving me
with it.
insane. I'm holding on for the ones that burn, for the ones that
Without it.
burn.
So
I'm holding on.
yeah, does that kind of make sense? It just kind of, it's really just an EQ. It's kind of given me some just presence in those kind of frequency ranges, and that kind of probably 2K to 5 or 6K kind of range. Were you guys able to hear kind of the difference there? It's hard for me to tell because I'm listening, here. So
Yeah, it's coming through, man.
okay, cool.
Just got one other question for you. We've got a couple of other questions coming through here, so I'll try and
Yeah.
jump on a few of those. But when you're saying before, like, you wouldn't just go to and put a plug in on something just for the sake of it. If it sounds good, just leave it alone as an empty strip. When you say like, oh, I know it's going to need a compressor on it, what are some of the reasons that you would be like, right, that needs a compressor, rather than just going like, right, I'll just have the Fairchild or whatever set up ready to go just in case?
Right.
Like you talk about a super dynamic vocalist or someone that's got like a bit of shrill on the high end, or what's your sort of go-to signs just for those who haven't mucked around with compressors a whole lot?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good question. So, before I even start mixing a song, or rather not start mixing, before I do any processing at all, I put all the tracks, get them assigned out my buses, and I just really I level things first by literally like the volume and the relationship to each other first and foremost. And then I listen. And then as I listen, the song and the elements in the music is kind of telling me what it needs. So after I get it to a point where it sounds as good as it can with zero processing, and I feel like everything's sitting kind of in the place where it needs to be, no reverbs, no nothing at that point, just real, everything's just dry. Then as I've kind of studied the song in its rawest form is when I start adding things. I'll, to answer your question, I guess, with vocals specifically, yeah, vocals is, so a compressor kind of does it does one job, but the results can be multiple results. So the concept of a compressor is you're taking, the peaks, which are, higher amplitude, pieces, and lower amplitude pieces, and literally compressing them. So you're taking the high stuff and holding it from going so high, kind of clamping it down. But in that process, you're also, the byproduct of that is you're bringing the lower level stuff up in volume. So, what that's doing is kind of like giving you this like more in your face, kind of direct, intimate sort of effect. And then you can kind of manipulate how much of the transient like peak stuff you want to get through, which then therefore kind of like translates to punch. And you can, if you have a fast attack on something, obviously it's going to clamp down on it really fast. It's not going to let any of the real transient peaks through in like a vocal. Somebody, if he's like singing really hard, or if he's, going from really quiet to really loud really quickly, you want to be able to have, you don't want it to like jump out at you and then kind of get quiet again. You want it to sort of be pretty, obviously with the vocal, you want it to be intelligible the whole time. And you want it to be, you want to hear every single word that the vocalist is saying. The vocals obviously, arguably, I would say, are the most important element of most popular music. That's why people write songs. They want to, portray a message. They want to, tell a story. They want to make you feel a certain way, and you have to use words to kind of be able to relate to people, in that manner. So you want to obviously hear the vocals. So if they're whispering, obviously you can turn up the volume, and there's definitely a level of that as well. So it's like compressors aren't doing all the work. There's work happening, on my end too, which again, I sort of chose this one because it's pretty straightforward. But if you see here, like, I don't have a whole lot of automation. Like right here, there's some automation, like actual level automation, on my bus. But again, the vocals, these were recorded pretty well. I do some, actual gain, clip gain type automation in here as well. You can see like this is this little chunk is down one. So, this guy's up half, this little section's up two. I was just saying that's kind of like I turn that up, kind of coming out of that bridge, that you want some impact there. So there's not a ton of like actual like moving automation that I'm doing in this song in particular, because it probably didn't need it. I think when they recorded, I didn't record these vocals, they were recorded somewhere else, but they processed them, and they were, in a really good shape when they came to me. So that makes my life a lot easier when I'm mixing something, for sure. So I don't know if that answered your question as far as, when and how you would use a compressor. A compressor's, it can be an effect or it can be a control element. I guess is really what I was getting to, is that, you're controlling and kind of bringing stuff into your, more into your face, if you will, which is kind of the effect, but you're also controlling transients sort of simultaneously.
Sure. So that brings me to another question. So if these things are getting sent to you and they're already processed, and then you're throwing another compressor on top of them, like, are you pretty much just relying on your ears, or are you relying on session notes? Or how do you tell, like, if this person's already, say, squished it, 10 to 1 or whatever, you're about to go and do another 2 or 4 to 1? Is there kind of like some communication between you and the recording engineer, or are you getting like, dry stem as well? How does that work?
Typically, there's not communication like that. That would be nice sometimes. But yeah, I'm just using my ears. I'm, again, like, that's, putting the session up and just listening to everything completely dry, first and foremost. That's really, that's me knowing, like, I'm not going to go in with a preconceived notion. Like, again, like I said, I'm kind of going back on what I said. Like, this is usually what I always put, no matter what, on the vocal bus. And that's probably true, but there's less, sometimes I'm doing less compression. Sometimes I'm hardly doing any compression with it. I just actually like the way it sounds, because it kind of adds this depth and kind of realism. but also like a little bit of warmth and just kind of like, it's just like nice and gooey. And most of the time on it works and just sounds good on everything. So again, I'm sort of going back on what I'm saying. Like if I'm, I don't compress unless I need to, but I put this plugin specifically on almost always, whether I'm using it to compress or not, just because I like what it does in general. But I guess just again to answer your question a little bit more in detail is I definitely I don't do anything, unless it needs it, unless in my ear is hearing that it needs some compression or it needs some EQ and it needs something. So I probably spend a good hour at the beginning of a session just putting all the tracks up and getting them leveled out with nothing happening on them, and then that will tell me like, okay, wow, these guitars are real peaky and poking out and just kind of like in a way that I don't like. So then I know I'm going to have to compress the guitars, or the drums just don't have a lot of weight to them, so I know I'm going to need to add some low end to like the kick, and maybe I want that snare to have that kind of more chesty kind of like thump to it too, so because it's like sounds real thin and kind of papery. So I'm thinking about all that stuff as I'm listening to it in its raw form, and over time I've like, that's the next trick. So first trick is knowing that something needs something, whether that's EQ, compression, effects, reverb, delays, whatever you want to say. First, you have to, in your head, make a decision or have a plan and say, yes, this needs something. This needs some compression. Now, the next step is, which compressor do I use? And, how am I going to use this compressor? Am I going to use it to, be a control element? Or is it going to be something that I need to use to kind of get a more in your face effect with it? So those are kind of like the two decisions that I'm making, after listening to this song in its raw form. Like, what does this need? And when I decide what it needs, what now unit am I going to use, whether it's a plug-in or a hardware, compressor, EQ, or the desk or whatever, to achieve what I don't like about it, to kind of help fix that and make it work together with the other things. So yeah, I mean, that's really kind of my starting process with all of that. What should we do next, Chris? Should we go into since I'm screen sharing, I can't really see the questions or anything like chat or anything. So
Yeah. Hey, well, let's do one or two questions that sort of apply to what you're talking about a little bit, and then we might go on a little spin at video. What do you think?
Yeah, we can do that. Let's see.
I'm eyeing off this guy who's this attendee who's asking about your work with Linkin Park and what kind of vocal processing you'd use on some of those recordings. So I guess just to clarify there, your role within the Linkin Park crew and how you went about capturing some of those sounds.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, first off with Linkin Park, what I did with them is I didn't do any studio recording stuff with them. What I did is I was on the road with them, and we multi-track recorded, mixed, and released every one of the live shows over the span of, I don't know, from 2008 to like 2013. So for about 5 years, which is like translated to like over 300 shows, is what I had done, what I did with them. So I also was in charge of doing their playback system, and basically anything that was in charge of anything electronic on stage. So but yeah, what I did with them, and I guess to answer the processing question is capturing Chester live, you know, it's been a while, obviously since 2013, which is, you know, been a while since I did that. So I'm trying to think exactly what we used, but you know, Chester just had like, you know, an amazing voice anyway, you know, and he really like had a good control about his voice and stuff like that. So I think with those recordings, you know, there was some tuning that we did. If there was like a stinker note here and there, we would kind of like go in there and, you know, I'd go in there and fix that. But yeah, I mean, basically it was just, you know, again, enhancing what he already had going, and, you know, probably less, you know, we were not treating that so much like a record as much as we were treating it as, when I mix a live show, I want it to sound like I'm at the show. You know, I don't want it to sound like I'm listening to a record of a live recording. That to me defeats the purpose. I'd rather, you know, I want to kind of recreate the show experience. So there's like a lot, you know, I typically mix a lot of like the actual like audience and crowd mic in, and there's a lot of automation that's happening there where, you know, in between songs, or if, you know, there's a sing-along part, you know, like we had 6 audience mics kind of throughout the arenas typically, and so I would be automating and bringing those in and out, to kind of get that feel of just being at the show in the venue, like a little bit more of a live kind of feel. So I don't know if that answers, you know, his question or her question.
Well, all right. Look, we're kind of pressing time a little bit here, but do you want to go take us for a little bit of a tour around the studio and show us some of the stuff you've got set up and how you run it?
Yeah, sure. Let's figure this out here. Let's do this one. Actually, this'll be better here. Where I'm coming back here. All right. Bear with me 1 second. All right. Super high tech here. So here we go. We've got, I'll kind of just give you, I know we talked about, you know, this is another fun box that I have here. This is this box that I designed called the Porsche Street Stomp, and it's a transformer box. It's got some cool harmonic kind of drive, distortion, impedance stuff. We won't even get into this. This is like a brain melting kind of thing that will take up a lot of time, but it's really fun, and I'm happy to answer questions on that, like on the chat or email or whatever. But this is a fun box that has some kind of unique, cool things that I use as my secret weapon sometimes. So, all right. So we've got, you know, my sort of tracking rack here. Again, I don't have, you know, like a ton of stuff, but I've got like some fun goodies that I like. So this is a vintage API 312 mic pre, which the API stuff is really cool. It's got this really nice mid-range presence to it. Love this on snare. Use this on snare when I'm recording snare a lot. Got the BAE Neve 1073, which these are pretty much, you know, standard in most studios. Like there's a reason why these things are in every studio. They just sound amazing. They've got this like really, you know, chunky, fat, warm, thick tone to them. You know, I've got a pair of these DBX 560 compressors, which these are really great for drums. They're super fast, super aggressive, you know, pretty cool. This guy is like a Neve clone made by Chameleon Labs. He's an older one, but he's got a Carnhill transformer in him, I think, which is like a mod that they make, but it's a 1081 EQ. with a 1073, kind of like this guy, Mike Pre. We've got a pair of the LA610s, which are, you know, again, a couple of my favorites. The 610 mic pre's are these are tube units. They're really, really, really warm. They've got, you know, they've got this nice kind of presence to them, but they're warm and kind of a little mushy, like tubes are. These are LA2A compressors along with this in this channel, which LA2As are, you know, again, I'm sure you're familiar with the plugin, or most people are. It's a real simple compressor, but very effective with, you know, on vocals and guitars. You know, they're great. This is the Daking stereo Fat3 compressor. This is sort of my go-to stereo bus compressor. This thing's, you know, pretty awesome. It's a Fat compressor, which is a different circuit than this guy below it, which this guy below it is a VCA. So the VCA, this is kind of a copy of a SSL bus compressor. And the VCA kind of sound, which is like my console, kind of has a sort of a tight, punchy, you know, sound to it, whereas this compressor is a little bit more of a not as tight. It's a little bit more transparent, but where this guy really shines is this knob right here. This is a knob that allows me to get a blend between a stereo link and a dual mono for these channels. So to get real nerdy, if this was all the way to the right, the whichever channel is doing the most compression basically slaves the other channel to do the same amount of compression. You know, most compressors either have a stereo link on or stereo link off, which would be like this all the way to the left, which now these are working completely independent of each other. But what's cool is that you can blend that. You can have them sort of sharing some characteristics of you know, gain reduction, but also doing some independent stuff. And what that does is it gives you this like really widening effect on the stereo bus. When you have it all the way in stereo link mode, you have a really tight kind of focused mono image, and you kind of, as you do this, it just widens out a little bit because you've got some discrete things happening from the left to the right. So that's another secret weapon of mine that I use, and that's pretty much on every mix I do. Even if I'm mixing it in the box, I'll usually always throw my stereo final mix back out through that and then record it back in because this guy's just so good. I've got these Warm Audio Pultec style EQs here. These are tube EQs. You know, pretty standard. They're really fun. You know, they've got just a 2-band. You've got a high and a low band on these. You know, but they just have this kind of like really warm, round, kind of fat thing about them. The other thing that's cool and special about these is that they've got these mods here, and what this knob is it actually is a drive, like an input gain knob. So it's actually hitting the tubes a little bit harder than just unity gain. So that's a nice effect if you want to get some of the harmonics and some of the distortion like the Decapitator was doing, to kind of give it some presence in like some of those frequencies. You know, I'm a big fan of like outboard reverbs. I have a hard time with some of the reverbs that are in the box. They're not super great in my opinion. You know, I've yet to really have a reverb that I totally love in the box. But like this Lexicon PCM 90 here is, you know, one of my favorites. I've got a couple secret, you know, I've got this Vocal Magic preset that I've dialed, and then this Drum Room preset that I really like. It's just unlike any reverb that's in the box. Let's see here. This is so funny.
Can I jump in and ask a really quick question that kind of applies to stuff someone's jumped in and asked here? As far as like some of your main techniques with live versus studio, you're saying like you got your lexicon and stuff there that are kind of your go-tos. Is any of that outboard gear applicable to what you're doing on the road, or are you like really relying on those plugins in the box?
Yeah, I mean the live stuff is definitely less. There's not a whole lot of hardware that I take out on the road. You know, the road is it's a little bit of a different world. I mean, as much as I love that stuff, it doesn't like to get moved around. It's older gear. And with the road, you run into some space constraints, and you know, you know, your production manager and who's in charge, they want to carry the least amount of stuff around as possible, because it costs a lot of money for truck space and freight and cargo and all that stuff. So yeah, the live world lives in the digital realm and in the box with that, you know, for the most part, I think, as much as possible. So that I think that answers your question. You know, the hardware stuff, it'd be nice to have out on the road, but it's just it's more about reliability out on the road, and making, you know, you might have to make some compromises and some sacrifices maybe sonically, but you know, as long as the show happens every night and the thing that you have out there works every time, that's the most important thing. You know, it's not so, again, there might be something that does something better and, you know, sounds nicer, but if it's old and breaks easy, we don't want it.
Sure. So I guess just to finish off this particular question, is there any kind of really, I guess, unique tricks with you that you take from the studio to a live scenario and vice versa?
I mean, I guess I could say yes.
Put you on the spot a little bit there. Sorry, man.
What's that?
I've put you on the spot a little bit there.
Yeah, you know, I don't necessarily, live is just so different than the studio. I mean, put it this way, I guess you know, it's kind of in both worlds, what's really important is gain structure. We didn't talk about that with the Pro Tools session, but the gain structure, if you don't know what gain structure is, it's really important. So the gain structure is, you know, you've got your source element and then your first stage of amplification. So if you got a microphone, you have a mic pre, that's your first stage of amplification. You obviously don't want to, you want to record someone and amplify it enough it's an amplifier. You want to get a good amount of amplification there, but not too much. You don't want to get it so hot that it's distorting, or so close to distorting, because then you don't have any room to like grow. Everything has to kind of get turned down from there, you know, which then kind of hurts the dynamic. And then the flip side, you don't want to record something super low, because then when you have to turn it up in other stages, you know, like after the mic pre at the console, you have to turn it up to get it loud enough to process and actually hear and get it in the mix with everything else. But what happens there is now you're bringing up all this noise because you're recording it so low, it's not as far away from the noise floor. So when you do amplify it at a low recording, now you're bringing up all this noise along with it. And if you do that across, you know, 20, 30, 40 tracks, now you've got 20, 30, 40 tracks worth of like tons of noise. And then you're kind of like, you're just like in repair mode. You're not really mixing and being creative. You're like, now you're just trying to get rid of noise, and that's no fun. You don't want to do that. So gain structure is really important in getting, you know, a good level you know, at every stage. You want to get a good amount of gain at your first stage, at your mic pre. You want to get a good amount of gain at your line amp, at your console. You know, you don't want the same thing. You don't want it to be too low, because now you're going to have to gain it up somewhere else down the line, like at your master bus, or in mastering. The mastering guys gets a really low quiet mix. He's going to have to amplify that, and that same thing, it's going to just bring up all this noise, you know. And then in the computer, it's a little bit easier to just kind of not really worry about gain structure, because some of the plugins kind of compensate for some of that stuff until it comes time to mix. And then you're mixing, and you know, a problem that a lot of people run into when they're mixing is, you know, they're just like, I'm sure you've heard this common thing of like, you know, mixing in the box, it just sounds like flat and doesn't have this kind of dynamic. I've gotten, and I think I can get just as good results mixing in the box as I can mixing on my analog desk. But I kind of have to think about it a little bit differently, and the gain structure is a really important part of that. You know, if I've got everything recorded as loud as it can possibly be, and then I have to just start turning stuff down, it doesn't, you know, it just poses a problem, because now all that like just stuff is just hitting my internal like guts of my DAW and in the computer. It just doesn't like that, you know. It likes the dynamic, and it works well with that. So you just kind of have to kind of keep that in mind. So I guess that's my answer, is that gain structure is something that, you know, whether I'm in a live environment or a studio environment, is something that is really important to take into consideration from the get-go. And that doesn't ever change. You know, your gain structure is just as important in a live setting as it is in the studio.
Can I throw a question in, if I can?
Yeah, sure.
I like the look of some of your outboard gear there. It's cool. So, so you're into the sort of idea of hybrid mixing. So in the box, but putting it out to the hardware when you feel. So can you talk us through a bit that process of how you do that? You use your desk all the time, or do you use hardware inserts? Or
I've now been pretty spoiled now that I have a desk that I really like. I mean, I've got this desk that I have is a Sound Workshop Series 34 console. It's from the early 80s, like 82, 83 is when this desk is from. And the, you know, the one thing that I find that is an advantage for me for mixing it, you know, on a hardware or using hardware, a desk specifically, is I can get to a place where I am closer to being done with my mix faster. And the reason why that is because, you know, in a computer, your mouse can only do one thing at a time. So you can only turn one knob at a time with your mouse. You know, I have two hands, which granted, yeah, I only have two hands, but you know, there's things that are constantly changing. So if I take an EQ on one thing, that is changing that one thing, but it's also changing the relationship with other things. So on my console, if I like turn an EQ up on one channel, it might now make my guitars sound a little buried. So I want to push those up. So if I'm EQing something and then I've got my fader on, you know, my hand on the fader for the guitars, I've got two things that I'm doing, and I'm organically kind of like blending those things in real time. And I get it to a point where I like it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now let's move on to the next thing. Whereas in the computer, I can only do the EQ, right? And then I know that my guitar level is too loud. So I have to do the EQ, then move my mouse over to the level of the guitar and bring it up. And then maybe I want to give it a little bit more EQ, give it a little more EQ. Maybe now I need to bring the thing down. So it's like each step, you know, like on the desk, you know, I'm doing two things, but there's all these little steps involved with each one of those two things that with a mouse now, if you were to break it down, number of steps is probably 8 numbers of steps.
I've got to like turn up an EQ, move my mouse over to the fader, turn it up. Now go to the EQ, turn the EQ down a little bit, go over the fader, move it down. So like each step is a thing. It adds up over time. Doing a full mix, all those, those things that would have been just 1 or 2 moves on a desk that were now 8 moves in the computer over the course of a, full mix, do the math. It's thousands of more kind of things to do. It's much more efficient for me to work on a desk, where you can actually move faders and touch EQs and use both hands and kind of like listen in real time. Whereas there's a lot of trial and error. Like I do a thing and then I have to rewind it and hit play. Oh, I didn't really like that. Then stop, go do the thing with the mouse, go back, hit play again. So it's a lot of that, that's like why I love mixing on hardware, is it really speeds up the workflow for me.
Do you worry that if you're coming out of the box, then you have to do the recall, or do you print everything, or
that's yeah, that is definitely the trade-off to using the hardware, is the recall side of it. I typically, again, this isn't a rule, but when I get to a point where I think it's pretty dang close and I know that, we're not going to finish it that night or whatever, I make stems. And those stems, I'll recall some things that I maybe know, like my stereo bus kind of chain. I'll definitely notate those and recall those. Maybe some effects.
Maybe not everyone knows what you mean by creating stems like that. Could you sort of
got it? Yeah, no problem. So, okay, so we get the mix to a point where, myself and the client are, so this, a lot of times I don't have a client sitting in here mixing with me. A lot of times they just send me files and I'm in my room by myself mixing, getting it to a point where I think it's good. And typically the client will send some examples of maybe some things that they like, that they kind of want their song to sound like sonically or whatever, just some examples that will help me kind of get there. Fast forward, we've spent a few hours. I get it to a point where I think it's really good. I make the mix and I send it off to them, and they're, say it's 10 o'clock at night there or something, and the client's like, "It sounds really good, but I'm kind of burnt. I can't make a decision right now. Like, I'll get back to you in the morning after I listen to it in my car and after I listen to it in my studio and all that stuff." So at the end of the night, and maybe we're not going to be able to come back to the song for another day or two. Maybe I have another session with a different client the next day. So what I do is when I print stems, is the mix that I have up on my console and in the computer, each element, which again I can screen share you here, is stemmed out. So when you guys were looking at my session before, these raw snares, for example, so there's all these snare tracks. There's different levels, and there's this, EQ that's happening and compression that's happening here. So when I make a stem, what I'm doing is I'm recording those elements collectively, because those all kind of make one instrument. I'm recording those all to one separate stem. Again, this is a bad example because this one I don't have separate stems for the drums particularly, but I have all the drums are mixed together. But if you see this here, you've got bass stem. These are my stems. So basically these are the drums that have all the processing that I've done in the box through any of my outboard gear, through my console, level wise, EQ wise, all that stuff is now recorded back into the computer as a stereo track. So when you take all these stems and all those elements and basically solo them all together like this, and you hit play, those basically equal my exactly the same as what my left right mix is as if it was running through the desk. But now it's just a bunch of stereo channels that at 0 they add up to the full mix. And what that does is that allows me to recall, basically I'm committing all the things that I did to an audio track that's never going to go away. There's some limitations to being able to tweak those after the fact, but that's why I have to be pretty dang sure that I'm at a place where maybe it's just a level thing that I need to do and not so much of an EQ or a compression thing that I need to do. And again, that goes back to why I do my template the way I do, and why I run, all my kicks and my snares kind of together through their own bus, is that I'm treating them as one element. So if, I need to maybe add a little bit more compression to my kick stem, I can add a little bit of a compressor after, the stuff that I've already done to give it a little bit, less snap, if that was what the client wanted. Like, the kick's too snappy. We need to make it less snappy. And I put a compressor on it that's going to just limit some of the peaks and dynamics with it. But I do that with every element of the song. So does that answer your question, Gareth?
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah,
okay.
It's nice to have that hybrid side of things. It's great. Yeah.
Hey,
Chris, any more questions from the crew?
I've got another one that's kind of related to the whole in-the-box hybrid thing. Is there any, just on the flip side, is there anything in particular that you would absolutely keep in the box as far as your processing or whatever goes?
No.
Nope.
No,
right.
I would, I think that sort of to go along with what Gareth said and what we talked about is, if I was working with a client and I knew with 100% certainty that this client would be, I don't want to say picky in a bad way, but somebody that we know we would have to do, there's going to be a lot of revisions, and we're going to be doing tweaks on this stuff a lot, then I would probably say, you know what, I'm just going to live in the box with this one. That would be really the one thing that would make me say, yes, I will just do this all in the box, because it will save me a lot of time and effort and hassle in the long run, and the client too, because he's going to want to have these things turned around quick and make changes. And if I have to recall and pull up stems and, it dig into the stems, it gets a little bit more time consuming. So
Sure. I guess
yeah.
we'll use that as a segue into our next section here, where we talk about a bit of artist relations stuff. So that comes off not so much as a technical question, as I think it was maybe intended to be, but more so as about qualifying your client properly and just knowing sort of what you're getting into before you hit record at all.
Yeah, I think that's, I think we talked about this a little bit in the first one, reading the room, if you will, and knowing when to say and do certain things, not only from a technical standpoint, but from a, just like a vibe standpoint, and it's to go, kind of on the flip side of that. If you have questions, I would say, ask them. There's no dumb questions, because you're trying to get to a certain place with this client, right? And you're trying to give them the best thing that they can have. So if you have a question, ask them, say, hey, do you want reverb on your voice? Do you like this delay? Do you, sometimes the client won't necessarily speak up. Those kind of like, they just think you're maybe going through your process, and then you've spent all this time on it, and then they're like, oh, I don't really like the delay on my voice. But you're like, oh man, I spent like an hour just dialing in this delay. That stuff, just ask them. If you have questions like, hey man, or, you know, like, do you want to have this delay on your voice? Like, what kind of effect are you looking for? What, what are you going for here, like vibe wise and sonically? And ask those questions before you do anything. I think it's the same thing as kind of like I was talking about before. I mean, don't do anything unless you need to. You know, if the guy's like, no, I hate reverb, I hate delay, I just want my voice to be totally dry, then you don't even have to worry about any of that stuff, because you might want to put it on there, but if they don't want it, they're the client. They're the ones that are paying the bills, so that you want to give them what they need, you know, and so you just need to know how to get to that place. So yeah, you've saved yourself and them a lot of time if you ask some questions beforehand to really know what they want before you even start doing anything.
Sure. Just to, I guess, sorry, before we jump into the artist relations thing too much deeper, just had a couple of little technical kind of questions from a few of the attendees here. Just so,
yeah,
we're going to have to go with like any kind of gear in the box. I'm guessing like, you know, this person's speaking about like, hey, if I'm going to deck out my in the box setup, what's your kind of go-to like packages? It's like pretty generic kind of plug-in question, but I'm guessing a few people out there are thinking about it. Like any particular companies, like you were showing us that bit of Isotope gear before.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, let's see if I can get this camera here so I'm not having to look up and down the whole time here. Pretty good there. All right. Yeah. I love, again, I love the Plugin Alliance. They have this bundle called the Mega Bundle, and there's so many cool plugins in there. You know, a bunch of kind of like old emulations like SSL channels, Neve channels, Focusrite channels. Those sound really great and are really versatile, and I use those on every single mix. They just sound great. They also have a lot of really cool, if you're like an in the box guy, they have some really cool guitar amp emulations and bass amp like SVT, and they have like diesel amps and some cool amp emulations that not a lot of people have, and they sound really good. That's like, that would be you know, one of the go-to bundles. They have like a mastering kind of limiter in there that I really like to use when I'm doing mastering and stuff as well. So yeah, they have some really cool stuff. I would highly recommend their stuff. And for me, for my system, because I have an HDX system, most of their plugins are DSP-able, if you will. Like, there's native plugins, and then there's DSP plugins like, you know, a lot of people are probably familiar with the UAD stuff, where the UAD stuff, what's cool about it is it's not using the computer to do the processing, it's using the UAD native DSP, so it lets your computer not be as taxed. With Pro Tools system, they have a similar thing. It's just their HDX card has DSP built in, and certain plugins can actually access and utilize that DSP. And the Plugin Alliance makes a bunch of plugins that actually can utilize that DSP instead of taxing your computer. So that's another reason why I like them. And if you have an HDX system, that's a super big bonus for those. You know, and not only are they awesome sounding and have a lot of really cool ones, they're also really, you know, cheap in the scheme of things. They're like, you can either buy the bundle, which I don't remember how much it is, but you get a lot. It's like maybe $500 or something, which is a lot up front, or you can do it a subscription base, which is, I think it's like $25 US a month. But what's really cool about that also is that if you have like a home computer, like a desktop computer, and then you have a laptop that you take around with you as well, you get 3 licenses with that. I sound like I'm doing a Plugin Alliance, like I'm endorsed by them or something. I wish I was, but I'm not. I just do really like their products. You get 3 licenses basically for the $25. So you can put it on 3 separate machines, which is really cool. Like, say for me at my studio, because we have you know, 2 rooms, an A room and a B room, and then I also have my personal laptop. So I have one subscription, and it kind of covers all of my bases. So it's really cool, cost effective. Isotope stuff, really great. You know, I love the alloy. I love the ozone. The ozone's a little bit tweaky for, you know, it takes some getting, you know, deep diving, but it sounds really good. Their trash plugin, which is like a distortion kind of like the Decapitator, does some stuff, but it's multi-band, so you can do different things with different bands. That's a really cool plugin. You know, those are, I mean, I would say between those two are kind of like, those things end up on basically all my mixes. You know, the standard, like I said, the standard Fairchild is like my go-to. I love that thing on a lot of stuff that just comes with Pro Tools. Again, if you're not using Pro Tools, I'm not sure how you can get it. I think it's a Pro Tools only thing, I think, but
all right. Hey, so we might jump into some of the, we're just pushing time a little bit here. So just as far as like artist relations, I don't know if you want to start off that conversation or if you want to maybe go off one of the questions that we've just had through. Completely up to you.
Let me kind of skim through these questions real quick. I know,
Sure.
yeah, we did sort of get time sort of like went away on us, huh?
We just have to.
Let's see here. I see, yeah, I guess we kind of answered that. Analog versus digital equipment and EQ, we kind of talked about that. Let's see here. What dB do you record to aim instruments at recording before getting into mixing? That one, I'll talk about that. There's no like dB per se, like number that I go to. You know, again, I try to get go back to my gain structure kind of conversation where I want to get a good level, not super hot, you know, not in the red, but also not really, really low. You want to get a good kind of gain structure in there and just kind of maintain and think that, you know, that sort of to maintain on all of your tracks that you're recording, you know, a good kind of like middle ground of level when you're recording. So that will help you when you're mixing in both ways without bringing up a bunch of noise, but it also give you some headroom to kind of push stuff and build some dynamics into things. So I think that might help answer that question. From, let's see. I'm seeing a lot of plug-in stuff, which I think we just talked about. Yeah, I guess, you know, the other one thing that I would talk about as far as one thing we've talked about is like recording gear. But another thing that's really important, again, that I don't think a lot of people talk about that I've seen, you know, other engineers or producers per se, is like the actual instruments themselves. You know, I don't have a ton of stuff here at my studio. I mean, you can see I have some guitars on the wall, but like all the guitars and things that I have are all really, I mean, in my opinion, really good and or unique. You know, most band guys come in with their own stuff. Sometimes, yeah, they have some great gear, but I try to have something that's a different flavor than what most people have, because that's the kind of stuff that will help make a recording unique and help, like, you know, or like an interesting, like I've got this, you know, ukulele on the wall over here. And it, you know, it's just like weird kind of fun stuff like that. I mean, and I've also, my new pride and joy during the whole pandemic is my modular synth setup over here. That kind of stuff is like the thing that, again, I don't think most people really talk about, like engineers, because I don't know why. I mean, it's not a recording device, but it's something that is really gives and adds a unique texture and element to people's recordings. You know, like if somebody maybe isn't like, doesn't come in the studio and says like, yeah, I need to use some modular synth patches for this song, but like the song's evolving and I'm kind of like, as I'm mixing, I'm like, I know my instruments. I'm like, hey, I think this would be really cool if we ran this through, like this kind of modular patch that I have, and I kind of know how to get there. And, sometimes they're like, no, that's not really that cool. But sometimes people are like, oh my God, that's so cool. And it's just a unique thing that like nobody else, not that nobody else has a modular synth, but it's something that is not very common. And it's so, I use that a lot in my process. I use instruments for, kind of like my sonic texture and signature in a lot of ways, so I have these instruments that I like, that I know really well, that are not typical instruments that, I kind of either suggest or hear things that might work well on somebody's record. And, if they decide, yeah, that's really cool, it's like, that's something that a lot of people say, man, that was that thing that made my record really special and different and unique. So, sorry, I went off on a tangent, but that's something that like nobody ever told me that when I started, and I never really thought about that. I just kind of like learned that through osmosis, because I was just wanting some cool, unique things when people just came in with the standard, like, oh yeah, you have a great guitar and like a great amp, but it's still just like everyone else's great guitars and amps, but nobody has like crappy or sometimes crappy or weird or different kitschy things. So I've definitely, encourage, if there's like some weird snare at the pawn shop that you see and it just is like plastic and sounds weird, buy it. If it's $10 or something, just buy it. I guarantee it will make it on somebody's record somewhere down the line, because they'd be like, oh, this is so cool and it's different, so
Sure.
that's like my side rant.
Nice. So just a quick little geek question of my own here. So you've got the little igniter head down the bottom there, but as far as like geeky kind of crappy amps that you've got kicking around for that very purpose, have you got anything cool to show off there?
Well, yes, I do. That's not in this room though. I'd have to run out to the other room and get it. But I do have, there's one, I mean, I can tell you, and they're pretty easy. So I have this Roland Sound Cube, my guitar amp. They're like, you can get them for like 50, $60, and it's like they make different sizes. The one I have is like a 5-inch speaker, and they're just like they're like literally like a cube. They're this big. But they sound like so cool. I don't know what they have. They just have a thing to them. Like the one that I have has this tremolo effect, and it's like, it sounds so kind of cheesy, but like in a really cool way. So I actually use that tremolo from that thing a lot on a lot of different things. So yeah, that's like kind of a crappy thing. I mean, the Egnator, isn't crappy, but again, I'll kind of like show it to you, but it's got like a bunch of different modules that go with it. And the different modules are kind of, actual, like this one's, this SL here is, like a plexi. They're actually like the real circuits, so it's kind of like 6 amps in one. So it's kind of a interesting, fun thing. And so I have 6 amazing amps, but all in just like one head. So there's just things like that I pick up that just seem that are interesting and different, that not a lot of people have that I know of.
Hey, we better start rounding it up, but we meant to talk about some post-production stuff as well. So you've done a little bit of work in the post-production audio world. Do you want to give us a bit of a lowdown on that?
Yeah. So I mean, like mixing in surround is a totally different world, and it's kind of an art in itself. And I have not done a ton of it, but I mean, I've mixed a good chunk of things in surround, and the surround field, and now it's even next level, which I haven't done, but with the Dolby Atmos stuff, they've now got like overhead speakers that exist, which I'm really excited to kind of you know, dig into hopefully one of these days with a project. But the post-production things, you know, it's a little bit, it's definitely a different kind of vibe. The stuff that I've done a couple things for film. You know, I did this ministry thing, which that one was pretty straightforward. It's basically, we just added a third channel for like the center channel for like a dialogue kind of thing. So you just, now that you're, instead of mixing out of 2 speakers, you're mixing out of, you know, 7 speakers. So you've got a lot more space physically and sonically to work with. So I found like it's almost exactly the opposite of mixing for stereo, whereas stereo, I'm trying to get all these things to work together. So I have to subtract a lot of, like I was showing you guys earlier, a lot of the kind of like mid-range like stuff that just mucks up the sonic spectrum and like makes things muddy. So you're taking a lot of that stuff away. In a post-production setting, it's almost like the opposite, because you've got these discrete speakers everywhere and all this, you know, information that you can spread around all these speakers. So to get something to sound fat and thick and big, and you don't have to like cut those frequencies out as much. You kind of almost have to add them back in because you want to fill up this space rather than just have something coming from this speaker and something coming from this speaker. You want to kind of have this immersive thing. You know, so that's like the biggest thing that I found, like with the on the flip side of doing on a technical end, is instead of cutting and like shaping some things to make things fit, I almost have to add stuff to make the elements bigger and more thick and more fat, so that it just doesn't sound small and tiny, that so I can make it feel like you're really engulfed in a space, kind of thing. So that would be, you know, my experience with just like on the technical side of mixing for that kind of thing in that environment for surround, and, you know, in that world. I mean, it's a little bit, it's still kind of the Wild West in a lot of ways. You know, there's no kind of like right way to do it, and there's not, you know, a ton of releases and things out there that anyone's like, yeah, that's what I want. You know, everyone's just kind of like, make it sound good, and so you you do.
Awesome, man. So we're gonna finish up with a couple of questions. Maybe we'll pick a few from last week here, just to try and round it up a little bit. But as far as like, I guess, any kind of specific books or, you know, any kind of training or anything like that that these attendees can jump in and have a look at, be it online or, you know, if there was any kind of textbook or anything like that that's kind of been your go-to over the years, is there anything that sort of comes to mind there that you can sort of give a bit of a shout out to?
You put me on the spot with that one again. You know, there's I think Yamaha has a sound reinforcement book that they, you know, that's probably, I don't know, they wrote in the, you know, 70s or 80s. I don't even know, but it kind of talks about
like
there you go. There, that's it. That book, I mean, that book I learned a lot from. You know, I kind of started out yeah, there you go. That's so funny. There you go. That I would say that one sticks out to me because I think I'm a little bit unique in the sense that I'm kind of I'm like a, you know, like with this whole thing, I'm kind of like, I like to like get in and build stuff and fix stuff. And I know about, I'm not an electrical engineer by any means, but I mean, that book in particular really like taught me the basics of, you know, of signal flow on a component level, how sound actually works in the air, and like, you know, just the technical elements of all these kind of things that you're dealing with on a daily basis, you know. You know, so it, like that book in particular was really important because I learned so much from, you know, just soldering and fixing things and kind of troubleshooting to understanding, you know, how waves and sound works in a room, you know. And so that book is definitely was a great book that I read early in my career too. And I didn't fully understand it until later, as I kind of like used and realized those things in practice, so that's so funny that you had that book, but that's awesome.
Total nerd. There's a link to
Totally.
that. It's in the chat for anyone who's interested there. It's called the Sound Reinforcement Handbook. Definitely worth a read.
I see one question here that I did want to actually address real quick.
Far away.
From Shamel. He asked, do you ever overrule a client's choice if they ever insist on a really bad idea? Is it part of the engineer's job to make it sound good or to make it how the client wants? So that's a trick question. But, like, there's some like engineers and producers that like rule with an iron hand and, are very much like, it's my way or the highway, I think. And there's some people that are like very complacent, and I mean, I think it's just like with anything, you want to kind of find a happy medium. And from my point of view, on the last session, we kind of had this talk slightly about, do you get taken advantage of, and sometimes like a pushover. And I think that, as I've progressed in my career, I've gotten better at making a decision and sticking to it. But I'm also never like my way or the highway. What I always do in this kind of situation, where if I don't think what the client wants is a good idea, I have to come up with something. I have to come up with a better idea, right? So I have to beat it. Like if they want, some sound or some delay or something, and I don't really like it, I have to be able to beat it. So now I'm like the one that has to prove my point, basically. So I have to make it happen and do it. And if the client is, I like to establish that early with the client, and I'll tell a band that I'm producing or whatever, and say, hey, look, beforehand, I'm going to come up with a bunch of ideas and I'm going to throw them out there, and all I ask is that you try them. You don't have to like them, and I'm totally okay with my idea being shot down, but I want to be able to at least try this, because I want to make this project the best it can possibly be. So, if a client, and on the flip side, same thing, if a client comes up with an idea and I don't totally agree with it, I'm not going to shut it off, but I'm going to like try and show them what my alternative is to that, and see if they like that alternative better. And if they do, then we've both won, because they got something that they like better, and then I made my idea got used, and I was like right, and inside I'm like, yes, I was right. But on the flip side of that, it might not work and it backfires on me, and I'm kind of like, you know what, you were right, your idea and your thing was better. So I like that question, because that comes up so much, like literally that thing. And I mean, it's not an aggressive or an awkward thing. It's just like, it's one of those things that's part of the creative process, I think. And, and again, it's the same as like putting a plug in something. Don't, like if you don't like the idea, but you don't have an alternative, I wouldn't say anything, because what's the point of saying it if you can't show them something that's better, or like give them an example of like what you would do instead. So, if you're gonna challenge a client on that, be ready to like, put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. So I don't know, is there any other questions that you see, Chris?
Look, I don't know, is there any that are standing out to you? We're going to wrap this up really soon. Maybe where do we go here? Maybe we'll just go back to a couple of more techie kind of things. So like if you had a limited budget, like, would you be buying good preamps or good, like good converters, those kind of things? Like what would you be spending if you're a student and you've say got like $1,000 to set yourself up with something kind of unique, but something that's going to make a difference? Obviously like a nice mic or something's going to be great. Is there anything that's just, stand out to you as far as like a little, like a lunchbox mic pre or something that you'd blow your cash on?
I think what I would say is none of those, but all of those. But what I would say is like, if you're on a limited budget, I mean, obviously you have to have all the things, right? You have to have a mic, you have to have a mic pre, you have to have an interface. But if you have a little bit of extra money to spend, I would say spend it on speakers. Get a set of monitors that you really like, that you really trust, that are gonna be able to tell you, you know, what you need to hear. I mean, spending, you know, I've just recently upgraded to some ATCs, which are amazing, but they're also ridiculously expensive. You know, but I also, you know, have Genelecs and NS10s, and like, I know them all. You know, get something that is good. Spend some money on some good speakers, but because it will help you, you know, in the long run, getting to a place that you're going to be happier with more consistently and in a quicker way, I think. You know, so if I had a little bit extra money and I didn't have a good set of monitors, I would put that money towards like a better set of monitors. And that's, again, that's sort of a relative term, because you've got to like try them out and like really listen to them. So I would just talk to like maybe some friends or some other studios that you know around town that have some speakers, and you know, go over to your friend's house and listen to some stuff that you've done or that you like on those speakers and see how they like translate. And that would be a good kind of telltale way of saying, yeah, I like these and I want to invest in these, you know. But on the next flip side of that, I would say, you know, a lot of people say, hey, yeah, you know, mic pre's are more important than mics. I would say the mic is probably more important than the mic pre, in my opinion. You know, you can get away with like a less good, cool, vibey mic pre if you have a really, really good mic. Whereas if you have a really crappy mic but a really, really good mic pre, you're still not going to really get a great result because the mic is crappy, you know. So I would say that that is something, if you're deciding on whether, it's definitely a lot cooler to have a Neve and a cool mic pre than it is to have a cool mic. But I think the mic in the scheme of things is going to be your better investment, you know, on that level. So that's kind of where I would say, you know, the transducers, the actual things that are the analog pieces of gear, your speakers that are translating to your ears, and then the thing that's translating your acoustic sound into an electrical form with your mic, are the two kind of most important things in the chain on both sides, in my opinion.
Sure. Awesome, Dylan. Well, thanks heaps. We know it's getting late over there in LA, so we're going to wrap it up now. Just for those of you who are not students at SAE, there's actually the SAE Open Day that's coming up in the last half of August. All the different campuses have different dates going on there. There's a link to all of the dates individually that's just gone into the chat there. So if you're interested in doing any study with SAE, you can jump in and click on that. And yeah, feel free to shoot through any particular inquiries through to there. But anyway, back to finishing it off. Dylan, thank you very much, mate, for joining us again. For all of those playing at home, there's actually a third session that's coming up on the 3rd of September, which is a Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in that session, we'll be going into a little bit more about mixing and Pro Tools session techniques, larger session formats, things like, you know, really simple guitar and vocal mixing techniques. So you're going to get a whole lot sort of deeper down the rabbit hole there. And again, Dylan shared a couple of those sessions that you saw today via a Dropbox there. So you'll all get a link to that, as well as an invite to that third session. So make sure you check out your inboxes for that one.
We're going to talk more about like the live side of things, like the playback, and kind of like how those two things bridge together, I think, right, more in the third one too.
Beautiful. Yeah, looking forward to it, man. Awesome. Well, look, guys, keep throwing your questions through. We'll try and sift through them and answer some of them in the next one. We kind of ran out a bit of time there, but otherwise, Dylan, thank you so much again. Take care, and we'll see you in a few weeks for session 3.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Gareth. Thanks, Lauren, everybody at SAE. And, you know, that was cool. There's so many cool questions and good questions here. We need to do that on the next one. Like, maybe we'll do some questions at the beginning and kind of get caught up on some of these.
Most definitely. It's one of those things we can kind of talk all night. So, but anyway, man, we'll let you get to bed. Thank you again, and take care, all right?
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Cheers, guys. Have a good day.